The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweigh the dangers which are cited to justify it.
How many in the human race blindly follow the predominant ideology, programming, or belief system of their particular population or culture? How many without ever truly making an effort to investigate or question? Here's a quote from Mark Twain that should give us all pause on the subject. From Mr. Twain, "Man is a religious animal. He's the only religious animal. He's the only animal that has the true religion, many of them. He's the only animal that loves his neighbor as himself and cuts his neighbor's throat if his neighbor's theology isn't straight. Man has made a graveyard of the globe in trying his honest best to smooth his brother's path to happiness and heaven." How much does that apply to the carnage we see happening all over the planet and that we've seen for how many centuries with the human race, and when will that end? This is Dane Wigington. You're listening to the Global Alert News Hour for November 18th, 2017. It's a commercial-free news hour brought to you by GeoEngineeringWatch.org and is broadcast throughout Northern California on 1670 AM, 104.9 FM, and 105.7 FM. Saturday mornings from 6 a.m. to 7, and Sunday mornings from 7 a.m. to 8. Global Alert News is also broadcast on the East Coast by the PRN Radio Network at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Very fast announcement, then on to headlines. More and more and more headlines every week. Too many to cover. I'm trying to give the bigger picture, give enough of the most important dots to connect so that the wider horizon might be seen more clearly. If you're in the Reading area, as always, there are materials, free materials at Orchard Nutrition covering vaccination dangers, the blatantly false official narrative of 9/11, and the critically important climate engineering issue. If you live in the Reading, Shasta County area, just share those materials with others. Help us to sound the alarm. Quick announcement, Portland, Oregon this week, the Gym Fair event at the Oregon Convention Center. Started yesterday, runs through tomorrow, November 17th through 19th. Staunch ally of the anti-climate engineering, critical anti-climate engineering effort, the Gym Fair group. If you're in the Portland area, visit the Gym Fair event at the Oregon Convention Center and show your support, get free materials, help us to sound the alarm there. Our deepest gratitude to the Gym Fair staff and organizers. Next week, Monterey, California at the Monterey County Fairgrounds, Gym Fair event there, November 25th through the 26th. Show your support if you're in the Monterey area. Get materials, help us share theirs as well. I want to express my thanks to the individuals that are helping to get GeoEngineering Watch two-sided color glossy informational flyers, which can be seen on the homepage of GeoEngineeringWatch.org. Those flyers are being put in certain newspapers in various parts of the country as an insert. This is an excellent way to help sound the alarm, and my deepest gratitude to those that have helped spearhead these efforts in various parts of the country in various newspapers. As of December 1st, 13,000 color glossy flyers will be inserted in these newspapers: the Durango Herald, the Journal in Cortez, Mangos, and Dolores, and that's Colorado, by the way, and the Pine River Times in Bayfield. Also had thousands of flyers go in various papers in Wyoming. My thanks to those who helped with that effort as well. So this is, again, an excellent way to sound the alarm in your region, to have the newspaper insert the GeoEngineering Watch color glossy flyers as part of their daily distribution in the paper. This is a very strategic way to, again, sound the alarm. I want to thank also the Epic magazine, EPIC, Epic magazine, which has published an excellent two-page geoengineering, anti-geoengineering expose feature article in their November-December issue. You should be able to look that up online, Epic magazine. Look at that article. My thanks to those that helped that happen as well. Moving on to headlines, there's again too many to cover, but I want to cover something that's incredibly absurd that relates to the ever more critical vaccination issue, which is a direct threat to our immediate health and our lives in many cases. And this story illustrates the absurdity of the societal system we now live in. Here's the headline. Syracuse University, mumps tally now at 37 confirmed, 76 probable cases. Listen to this story and you'll understand how absurd it is. Syracuse, New York. A third dose of the mumps vaccine will be offered to Syracuse University students to help contain an outbreak of the disease that began on the campus in August. Continue listening and you'll understand how ridiculous this story is, how alarming it is. Public health and SU officials will discuss the new strategy at a press conference today. This was last week. As of Friday, SU had 27 confirmed cases and 45 probable cases. All of the cases have occurred among students vaccinated against the disease. According to SU, schools require students to get 2 doses of the mumps vaccine. Mumps is a serious contagious disease passed through saliva and respiratory secretions. So think about the absurdity of this story. All of the students that had contracted mumps had already had 2 doses of the mumps vaccine. And what's their cure? Give them a 3rd dose. We're living in an insane asylum, an absolute insane asylum, and I challenge anybody, do you really know what's in that vial that's being injected into you? Do you really know? You don't know. The things we do know or are told that are in there should be alarming enough. And when it causes something like this, and we look at the vaccination statistics from Africa, the African children that we're supposedly saving with our vaccinations that now have a mortality rate, a death rate on the vaccinated children in the first 5 months, it's 5 times higher than the non-vaccinated kids. 500% increase in infant mortality when they're being vaccinated. And we're to pretend that this is something to help children? It's the same here in the U.S. And this SU story is shockingly absurd that after receiving 2 mumps vaccinations, contracting mumps, their cure is to give them another mumps vaccination. Moving on with the circus of insanity that we're all living in. Draft environmental assessment for proposed outdoor testing at Chillico. Listen to this one that you're not told on mainstream media. The Department of Homeland Security and Science and Technology Directorate announces the availability of a draft EA for performing a collaborative scientific study with OSU University and multispectral laboratories that will include outdoor release of chemical and biological simulant materials at the Chillico Indian School campus outside of Newkirk, Oklahoma during the winter of 2018 and again the summer of 2018. The study is part of the Department of Homeland Security. Department of Homeland Security's ongoing commitment to preparedness and the shared responsibility of protecting the nation's critical infrastructure. That's how they're going to prepare, is to actually conduct their own outdoor biological test. And this is nothing new. I've been over this program after program, week after week. This is routine for our government and our military to conduct biological testing on innocent civilians. And they're now openly, blatantly announcing they're going to do this. The purpose of this study, reading from the report, is to gather data that will enhance our predictive capabilities in the event of a biological agent attack. So far, the only one launching biological attacks on U.S. civilians is the U.S. military, by the way. Specifically, this work will help predicting the extent to which an international release of biological agent may penetrate single-family and multi-family structures. These tests will release chemicals and biological materials that will be used to measure the amount of material that penetrates the buildings under varied conditions. Blatantly, openly announcing it, and the only ones to conduct biological warfare in the continental U.S. is the U.S. government and U.S. military. 277 such cases, I believe, by the late 1970s, or something in that range. This is public information. We don't know how many since, but certainly it's ongoing. For those who still believe that our government wouldn't carry out tests like those that I just described because our government is just trying to protect the population, please wake up and face reality. Elements in our own government have actually and aggressively been, as I stated already, willfully poisoning the population for decades, from fluoridated water to highly toxic vaccinations to completely contaminated food supplies to, as I stated again, actually carrying out hundreds of biological warfare tests on U.S. civilians. So consider and remember this. Our government is not only not concerned about the welfare of its own population. In fact, the U.S. population is an increasing liability to those in control of our government, something we should all remember. Continuing, Trump's FCC chairman wants big cable companies, and this is in regard to getting this news out, by the way, because mainstream media obviously isn't telling us anything that matters. Trump's FCC, Federal Communications Commission chairman, wants big cable companies like his old employer Verizon, as well as Comcast and AT&T, to be able to slow down and block websites or charge sites extra fees to reach an audience, fees that will get passed directly on to people like you. It's one more way of them controlling the internet. And now we have some of the internet entities actually claiming that they are going to determine what's true and what's not true. And whose narrative do you think they will follow? The mainstream media narrative of total deception and propaganda. That's their baseline of truth. And if you pass on data that doesn't go along with the official narrative, guess what you'll be labeled as? An untruthful site. And this is what we have shaping up. So we don't have what this administration told us they were going to do, transparency and disclosure. None of that across the board. It's simply a tightening of the noose of insanity around all of our necks. As I stated again, in the meantime, mainstream media fills their so-called headline news programs with long, drawn-out sagas of dramas we had this week, like the Roy Moore molestation and Al Franken kissing a woman without her consent dramas, and whenever that happened, 2006. All the while, the planet's life support systems are collapsing. The realities we have known are collapsing. And we have a population that's all too willing to watch the mainstream media meaningless soap opera. Doesn't mean I don't have any sympathy for those who these men might have hurt. But against the backdrop of a planet that won't support life much longer, I ask the listening audience, what's more important at this moment in time? What's more important when the media spins show after show giving us the types of dramas I just described in order to block real news from our view? More headlines. Yemen blockade may cause world's largest famine in decades. We hear nothing about this on mainstream media. 7 million people are on the brink of starvation in war-torn Yemen, which was already in the grip of the world's worst cholera outbreak when coalition forces led by Saudi Arabia, U.S. ally Saudi Arabia, whom we're selling hundreds of billions of dollars worth of arms to, Saudi Arabia that's on the Human Rights Commission, the lead on the Human Rights Commission. How can that possibly be? Let me continue. By Saudi Arabia, when Saudi Arabia tightened its blockade in the country last week, stemming vital aid flows, much like the U.S. did to Iraq, killing, by statistics, count of statistics, 500,000 children. Aid agencies are now warning that Yemen's already catastrophic humanitarian crisis could soon become a nightmare scenario if Saudi Arabia does not ease the blockade of the country, land, sea, and airports. We are weak. Our children, this is a quote from someone in Yemen, we are weak, our children are weak, we have nothing left to give. We can't even feed our animals anymore, said Noor Rashid as she cradled her daughter. Only God can save us now. We hear nothing about this. Moving on to another story that again outlines what we're not being told from mainstream media from this last week. Here's the headline. More than 15,000 scientists from 184 countries issue, quote, warning to humanity from that report. Mankind is facing the existential threat of runaway consumption of limited resources by a rapidly growing population, they warn. And scientists and media influencers and lay citizens aren't doing enough to fight against it. According to the letter, if the world doesn't act soon, there may be catastrophic biodiversity loss and untold amounts of human misery, they warn. Let's consider what they're saying. There may be catastrophic biodiversity loss. This is back to what I've covered in so many previous programs again. This is like the scientific community stating that if you leap in front of a speeding semi, you may be hurt. There's no maybe about it, and it's not coming. It's here. It's here. When we've lost 80%, officially 80% of insect populations, where is the could be part in this equation? It's here. It's now. It's kicking in the door now. This warning is way late and way short of how dire the situation really is. It's here now. And the 15,000 number of the scientists that signed that letter, I know that number's growing. And I know also on such an effort that there are those who would try to discredit that effort. We have countless legions of paid trolls who would try to sign such a letter in such a way that might make it discredited. It doesn't matter who signs this letter. It doesn't discredit the statement when the frontline data proves that this is absolutely true, in fact, far short of the truth. It is that bad. Did we hear anything about that headline in mainstream media? Anything at all? About a letter that contained that many signatures from that many countries? With that dire of a warning, we heard nothing about that. Nothing. Let's move on to the military-industrial, in this case, nuclear-industrial complex. Another headline, Massive Overkill, brought to you by the Nuclear-Industrial Complex. Reading from the report, these are not my words, this is from the report. Give Donald Trump credit. When it comes to nukes, he's gotten our attention. He's prompted renewed concern, if not outright alarm, about the possibility that such weaponry could actually be used for the first time since the 6th and 9th of August, 1945. That's what happens when the man in the Oval Office begins threatening to rain, quote, fire and fury, like the world has never seen on another country, or as he did in his presidential campaign, claiming cryptically that when it comes to nuclear weapons, quote, the devastation is very important to me. How cold, calculated, and calloused is such a thing to say like that, coming from a president? And when we consider the nearly 200,000 innocent civilians that were slaughtered unnecessarily by the nuclear bombs dropped in Japan, with the war that was already over, anybody who researches this historically will find this to be the case. Why did we need to drop those bombs? We didn't. But we have a country and a population that still defends that action, that horrific action, the only country to ever have used nuclear bombs on innocent civilians. And everybody pretends it's okay when it was anything but okay. So in regard to further pumping up the already massive overkill nuclear arsenal nightmare, Donald Trump is all in and doubling down on the Pentagon's plan to develop, under Barack Obama, to build a new generation of nuclear-armed bombers, submarines, and missiles, as well as a new generation of warheads to go with them. The cost of this modernization program, the Congressional Budget Office recently pegged it at $1.7 trillion. $1.7 trillion to build more weapons of mass destruction. We already have a military that's bigger than the next 10 militaries combined. So this is the plan. While the planet's imploding around us, with nuclear contamination everywhere, let's build more nuclear weapons of mass destruction. And how's that going around the globe, by the way, the nuclear nightmare on planet Earth? Here's several very recent headlines about the Fukushima cataclysm that keeps on giving. Here's one from November 16th. Radiation near Tokyo spiked to 100 million times normal after Fukushima. The intensive contamination hit Tokyo area, extremely high levels detected, info about radioactive contamination hidden from the public. Why is that a surprise? Of course it shouldn't be. Another headline from last week. Fukushima cover-up. Quote, keep cancers a secret, say doctors. Quote again, we're getting leukemia and cataracts and we die suddenly. Students having sudden heart attacks, officials say, actively ignoring reports of illness and death. Another headline. New study. U.S. state, this is Hawaii, hit with up to 200 times more Fukushima fallout than expected. Over 1 trillion becquerels of nuclear waste fell on Hawaii. Scientists say plume may have taken an alternative path, greater than anticipated. Everything's always worse than anything we're told. Isn't it time we figure that out? Not a little worse, unimaginably worse, on every front. Another headline. Nuclear accident alert after high levels of radiation over Europe. Major release of radioactive materials reported, over 100 trillion becquerels. Officials stated this, an unusual isotope. I don't think we've seen it since Chernobyl. No surprise again. Final headline related to Fukushima. Former U.S. Senator. All these Navy sailors have died after Fukushima radiation exposure. Ones that were kept close to the event itself, by the way, that's a whole other story, but they were kept close to the event, made to sign non-disclosure agreements in order to get off the ship that was exposed. Long story. TV program reveals many are now dead. Veterans break down in tears, suffering cancers, paralysis, amputations, internal bleeding, and severe pain. When will we pay attention to stories like this while we're waving our flags and pretending to be patriotic? And I will cover this in next week's broadcast in depth. How we completely neglect our veterans. Criminal. Even though these causes they've been made to fight in were wrong in almost every case and simply serving the empire, it doesn't change the motivation of some of those people that didn't realize what they were engaged in. And it doesn't make right the fact that our country then abandons those people, and our population that pretends to be patriotic doesn't seem to care that we've abandoned our vets. I've stated in many programs before, I worked with rehabbing NAM vets that were twisted, broken men that had stepped on mines. I gave to DAV and VFW because whatever those vets were made, whatever cause they were made to engage in that was perhaps very wrong, it doesn't mean we have the right to abandon them because they thought they were doing what was right. I'll cover that in more depth next week. Let's continue on with the radiation. Let's look at people like Ann Coulter, who has a voice on Fox News and other media sources, if you can call them that. And none of the sources are good. CNN's, MSNBC, they're all bad. But Ann Coulter, who told us after Fukushima, I quote, "Radiation is good for you." She actually said that. This is the sort of absurdity we have now that I covered in last week's program. The Trump appointee for EPA stating that children are having breathing difficulties because the air is not dirty enough. It's too clean. This is the Orwellian world we live in. People like Ann Coulter saying radiation is good for you. Trump appointees for the EPA saying the air's not dirty enough. It's not healthy because it's not dirty enough. I don't have the words for the sort of insanity that we're swimming in. Another headline, mysterious radioactive cloud over Europe hints at an accident further east. This is an elaboration on one of the headlines I just read. European authorities are providing new details about a cloud of mysterious radioactive material that appeared over the continent last month. Monitors in Italy were among the first to detect the radioactive isotopes. According to a fresh report, France's Radio Protection and Nuclear Safety Institute. European countries saw the radioactive cloud also, the report stated. Do we hear any of this on our mainstream media here? By the way, there's a radioactive cloud over Europe, something that we should all be concerned about. Our states, Hawaii, saturated, 1 million times more radiation exposure to places in Japan that we weren't told about. We don't hear anything about that while stories like Roy Moore and Al Franken and their infidelities are being pushed on us. That's what we hear about. More headlines. Trump makes it easier for police to get military equipment. Another headline. Trump adds to Washington's swamp, from that report. And this is not, again, Mr. Trump is just a part of the problem, like Obama, like Clinton, like all the rest, like the Bushes. I have to say that every time because if I say anything bad about Mr. Trump, which he justly deserves, everybody, because they've been trained to think in such polarized manners, thinks that that's somehow supporting the rest of the criminals that are in Washington. They're all criminals. I don't care which side of the fence they're on. I don't care which administration it was. They're all criminals. But the current criminal in the White House is Mr. Trump. That's who I'll focus on. Trump adds to Washington's swamp. President Trump's vow to, quote, drain the swamp was just one more empty promise as he adds to the muck with military contracts and key Pentagon jobs and other industry lobbyists at regulatory posts. Industry lobbyists put in regulatory posts. The foxes running the hen house. And that's Mr. Trump's idea of draining the swamp? No, that's filling the swamp with yet more swamp creatures, as some headlines have stated. That's exactly what that's doing. Another headline, House passes $700 billion military spending bill. While the planet's imploding around us, while we have nuclear contamination everywhere and every other type of contamination everywhere, and this is the focus of our country, this is how we're going to make America great again. Let's pump up the military juggernaut of mass destruction to even higher levels, utilizing what's left of Earth's resources. And as the letter from the 15,000 scientists stated very clearly, And how hard a concept is this to really understand? It's very simple. You cannot perpetually expand on a finite planet with finite resources, disrupting every former balance in nature that was here. There's no more balance. And once the scale tips, it starts to fall at free fall speed, and that's where we're at. We're in an abrupt climate shift, far worse than any normal global warming scenario, and the biosphere is in fact imploding around us. Climate engineering making it far worse, not better. Another headline. A top-secret desert assembly plant starts ramping up to build Northrop's B-21 bomber. Great. This is just what we need on an imploding planet. Heavy bombers, particularly those capable of carrying nuclear weapons, again, because we don't have enough nuclear contamination yet, it seems, have been among the most controversial military projects in U.S. history. When the B-1 bomber was rolled out, pacifists attempted to throw themselves under its wheels. The Northrop B-2 stealth bomber gave Congress sticker shock with its $1 billion per plane manufacturing cost. What are we going to have with the B-21 bomber to carry more nuclear weapons? Again, as if there's not enough nuclear contamination already. And when those in the military try to disclose things in the military, the honest people in the military, and I know there are many good men and women in the U.S. military, but what happens to them? I want to give one example. We have Pat Tillman, which I've been over in the past. If those who aren't familiar with the Pat Tillman story, I'd encourage you to look it up and read about it. Very honorable individual, gave up a great deal to join the military and do what he thought was right, realized what a circus of corruption it was, began to take notes, and our military killed him. They killed Mr. Tillman. And that's well documented. The cover-up is well documented. Now we have another case that has surfaced this last week. Green Beret was killed after discovering Navy SEALs' illicit cash scheme. From that report, military investigators now suspect that 2 of the elite Navy SEALs Team 6 murdered Sergeant Logan Melgar after he discovered they, the Navy SEALs, were illegally skimming money from a fund used to pay informants. The SEALs offered to cut him in, but Melgar declined. According to the news source, a few days later, he was found dead. Just like a mafia, that's what it's like now. The military-industrial complex. And anybody who truly tries to stand against it is dealt with by the criminal cabal that runs that complex, or those involved in that complex that are trying to gain something from it, like some of these soldiers were. Bottom line, while our country, our military, our government is engaged in trying to pay for even more weapons of mass destruction, as if we don't have enough. Let's move on to the continually worsening geoengineering issue, which the Trump administration is also, by the way, doubling down on. Look that one up on geoengineeringwatch.org. Trump administration geoengineering. Look it up. They're backing it. Even though they claim there's nothing wrong with the climate, they're backing climate engineering. Why? Because there's much more to climate engineering than climate engineering. Climate engineering is also weather warfare. By definition, it is weather warfare from bottom to top, and biological warfare because the elements are toxic, all of which we're breathing. Lab tests prove that. Again, moving on, the geoengineering subject, countless articles in geoengineering are now being published on a daily basis all over the globe. Here's an example from the International Business Times, published a few days ago. Artificially cooling Earth by mimicking volcanic eruptions could be catastrophic, study states. From that report, again, all mainstream sources pretending the elephant in the sky of climate engineering is not really there. We have a society that's all too willing to pretend that as well, because waking up is too scary, too painful. But not waking up is going to be even more scary and painful soon if we stay on this course. From this report again, scientists across the world believe that a process called geoengineering, which involves, this is all from the report, which involves imitating the atmospheric conditions after a massive volcanic eruption by artificially injecting aerosols into the atmosphere, can help counter the effects of global warming. But, continuing from the report, a team of researchers have debunked this theory and countered it by saying this process could in turn have devastating effects on global regions that are already prone to tumultuous weather patterns like severe storms and chronic drought. Of course there will be massive, catastrophic downstream effects. There is. There's no could in any of this. And imagine the sort of Orwellian world we live in when we have scientific panels, groups, organizations still pretending it's not already going on. They're afraid to admit to this, for some of the reasons I already cited. If you stand against the military-industrial complex, you will be dealt with immediately and harshly. So I understand the fear from some of these academicians not telling the full truth. This is already going on. The effects are already catastrophic. But imagine the society we live in, which is even more alarming to me in many ways, a society in which can't, or won't, is more the correct word, connect the dots. Incredibly visible dots, like the climate engineering in our skies and the sort of programming that goes on with people when you try to get them to simply open their eyes and look up, and their complete reluctance to do so. All the while, the biosphere implosion continues. More headlines along the same lines. This one's from Newsweek, but I'm pointing out that these headlines are everywhere. They're everywhere. How hard could it be to connect the dots for the population if they really wanted to wake up? They need to, and the criminal behavior of the media carries much of the blame here, because we have those in media actually participating in the climate engineering criminal cover-up. And they must be held accountable, legally and morally, by an awakened population once we get to that point. Here's another headline parallel with the first. Artificially cooling Earth with volcanic eruptions is dangerous. The lack of regulation is deeply concerning. There's not a lack of regulation. There is no regulation, none whatsoever. From this report, a controversial plan to cool down the planet by artificially stimulating volcanic eruptions could have disastrous consequences for Earth, yet there are no laws or regulations to stop any country or private company from deploying such technology. If you go to geoengineeringwatch.org and search massive Senate document and read the excerpts we have from that document that specifically state, this is a congressional Senate document that states anyone involved with these programs needs to have complete legal immunity. If this was something for the greater good, would they need complete legal immunity? States it right in this Senate document, 750 pages long, by the way. And goes over many other damning points as well. And the excerpts are there, so you don't have to go through the whole document. You can look at what we've already highlighted out. Just like the immunity that the vaccination companies have. Total immunity. If this was really something for the greater good, would they need total immunity legally? How hard can that be to figure out for the population? This is not about the greater good. Not in the case of geoengineering, not in the case of vaccinations. It's not about that. If the population was willing to use their sense of reason and face reality, we might be in a different situation, and they need to get to that point soon, or we'll have no chance to turn directions. Moving on, what are the climate engineers currently doing in the continental U.S.? They're fueling yet more climate destruction and weather whiplash. Yesterday, on Friday the 17th, it was snowing in parts of New Mexico and raining in parts of Canada, north of the Great Lakes. Why does that happen? As I outline every week, chemical ice nucleation for weather modification. Look it up. Look at the lab tests, look at the data, look at the patents. This process is ongoing. Look at the satellite imagery captures we have of this process of drifting bands of rain, no mountains, no colliding air mass, that from far above freezing temperatures somehow magically convert to frozen precipitation right on the radar screen. And what is this? It produces much more surface-based ice because these nucleating materials hit the surface often before they set up. It makes the roads much slicker. The chemically nucleated materials from this, even if it falls at what appears to be snow or sleet, tends to be a much slicker material than naturally nucleated snow or sleet. Many people who've driven in the snow for years are wondering why it's so much slicker now. That's why. Because it's not a naturally nucleated material. And they're more desperate using this material to create short-term weather whiplash engineered cool downs to create a few headlines so that people in other places where it's far above normal temperature still think, well, it's cold somewhere. It's cold somewhere, even though it's not that cold. And we now routinely see on weather forecasts snow predicted at 40 degrees, 45 degrees. Have people forgotten the laws of physics? Have they forgotten where naturally nucleated snow occurs? They seem to have, and when we have paid liars like those at the Weather Channel, Weather Central, and other power structure-owned entities whose job it is to condition the population to think this is all normal, when we have those types of criminal actors, and that's what they are, Weather Channel meteorologists are simply criminal actors. Watch their show once in a while. Watch Weather Channel, and you can see right through their facade. You can see right through it. If you know anything about what's happening in the world, you can see right through it. Theater to convince the population that everything's normal, natural, and climate engineering isn't happening. I saw Weather Channel actor Al Roker with a photograph of grid patterns in the sky that they were featuring on the Weather Channel. He stated, "Isn't Mother Nature miraculous?" How completely Orwellian. Just like Ann Coulter saying radiation exposure is good for us, just like the Trump appointee saying that dirty air is good for us. That's the world we live in. Moving on, more headlines. What's happening in the biosphere? What are the consequences that climate engineering is inflicting on the planet, helping to fuel? Human activity is doing immense damage to the planet. We have to face that fact from countless fronts. Climate engineering is making it worse, not better. Here's a headline. Researchers, Tibetan glacial melt threatens billions. From that report, with temperatures rising 4 times faster than anywhere else in Asia, the Tibetan plateau might soon lose most of its glacier and permafrost, affecting water supplies throughout Asia, Chinese scientists state. We don't hear about that in the U.S., do we? Finishing from that report, long known as the roof of the world, the Tibetan plateau is about the size of Western Europe and supplies water to nearly 2 billion people in Asia as the source of major rivers. The glaciers are retreating rapidly, grasslands are shrinking, and desertification is expanding. Regional precipitation has become irregular, water levels are dropping in major rivers, and the permafrost is thawing. Let's move on to another headline that comes with a warming world and a toxic world. Toxic algae. Once a nuisance, now a severe nationwide threat. They're talking about the U.S. here, by the way. It's a big, pervasive threat that we as a society are not doing nearly enough to solve, said Don Scavia at University of Michigan environmental scientist. We increase the amount of toxic algae in our drinking water supply, it's going to put people's health at risk. It's not a risk, it's going to make them sick, period. We have academicians now that never tell it like it is, never. They always have the gloves on. They never give a straight answer to anything, and they excuse everything away. Final sentence in this report, even if it's not toxic, people don't want to go near it. They don't want to fish in it or swim in it, and that means a loss of jobs and tax revenue. For the record, the jobs and the tax revenue aren't going to be much on a planet that's dead, and we're heading there at blinding speed. There's fish die off all over the globe, everywhere. Oceans are warming, stratifying, deoxygenating, algae blooms are taking over, and there are many, many causes, not just this or that. Some people want to blame it all on Fukushima, some want to blame it all on something else. It's many, many causes. Geoengineering at the top of the list, shredding the ozone layer, more intense UV radiation, it's warming surface waters faster, deoxygenating them, killing the beneficial microbes, allowing non-beneficial microbes to take over, many causes. More headlines. Grain production slides as Western Australia battles big dry and East Coast farmers suffer frost. These are the weather whiplash scenarios I'm talking about. Climate engineering is totally derailing and decimating Earth's life support systems. We have to expose this issue. From that report, Australian grain production is expected to take a big hit with volatile weather around the country. Weather whiplash. Climate engineering, the single greatest causal factor with the weather whiplash. Doesn't mean that the weather would be good or non-severe if we didn't have climate engineering. The planet is being assaulted on countless fronts, but climate engineering is fueling it, making it far worse, not better, and especially in regard to the weather whiplash scenarios that are occurring, which are affecting crops. Back to another food element that the populations of the planet depend on that's now completely collapsing. This is where I've stated for so many years that societal collapse is already unfolding. It's accelerating now. Here's a headline. The dying west coast of the U.S., exclamation point. Now cod populations have collapsed, joining the list of seabirds, seals, whales, salmon, sardines, starfish, dolphins, and tuna. You think that's something we might want to hear about on mainstream media when they're, again, pushing this week Roy Moore and Mr. Franken? The problem, this is from the report, the problem is not confined to cod. All marine life has been declining drastically along the west coast of America, Canada, even Mexico. And I've had people say to me, no, it's all fine at the ocean. I went there and looked. What an absurd statement. Because you saw an ocean with some waves, you have any clue what's going on below those waves? But that's the kind of denial we have here. Hard facts going to show up on the market shelf here soon. Ocean ecosystems collapsing. Another headline on the same story. Scientists shocked as fisheries collapse along West Coast. It's the worst we've ever seen, they said. Fish are starving. Death rates are skyrocketing. No babies being born, fish stocks at all-time record lows. This was covered in the Seattle Times, KBBI, more headlines. I don't even have time to go through them all. Ocean ecosystems collapsing. Protein source for the human species collapsing. You can't continue to loot, pillage, and plunder and pollute on a finite planet with finite resources. We're on what amounts to a spaceship. Earth is a spinning ball of rock in an incredibly harsh environment of space. Why does our species, so many of our species, think and believe, falsely of course, that you can do whatever you want to the web of life and not reap the consequences? Why do so many in our species believe that? In the U.S., so many are trained to believe that if you care about the environment, there's something wrong with you. Here's reality. If you don't care about the environment, if you're not extremely concerned about the environment, there's something wrong with you. That's the bottom line. Speaking of people that have something very wrong with them, here's another headline. Trump administration to reverse ban on elephant trophies from Africa. From that report. This needs to be considered. The Trump administration plans to allow hunters to import trophies of elephants they killed in Zimbabwe and Zambia back to the United States, reversing a ban put in place earlier. A U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service official confirmed to ABC News last week. What sort of twisted individual would hunt and kill an animal as magnificent as an elephant? What sort of twisted individual would hunt and kill anything that they're not going to eat? Just for a trophy to hang on the wall, that they pointed a high-powered rifle at something and pulled the trigger, as if that somehow makes them a bigger person. Absolutely sick and twisted to kill an elephant. I can't even begin to imagine. And to allow an import from an endangered species as a trophy. Why would the Trump administration be spending their time on allowing that? Spending any time at all on this issue if it was already illegal to do so, and they reversed that. I don't have the words for this sort of thing, and I'm appalled. I'm appalled beyond words about it. Moving on to yet another headline involving yet more environmental degradation to exploit and grind up for profit what is yet left of our habitat. No habitat, no human beings. Dead forests, no human beings. Dead ocean, no human beings. No ozone layer, no human beings. How simple is that? And yet the theme of the day at this point in time, and with this administration, more than any other previous administration, all of whom were criminals, is to decimate anything, everything that's left. To party the fossil fuel fiesta until the last possible moment. Here's the headline. America's wildest place is open for business. From that report, the Trump administration has declared the nation's public lands and waters open for business, particularly to the oil and gas companies. What a surprise. Is that a surprise? With people like Rex Tillerson, former top executive for the world's largest oil company, as the Secretary of State. Is that a surprise at all? Stacking the deck with industry lobbyists, as I read in the earlier report on this program. All out, no holds barred, loot, plunder, pillage till the brutal bitter end. That's where we're headed. So the Trump administration has declared the nation's public lands and waters open for business, particularly to oil and gas companies. In its first 6 months, the administration offered more offshore leases to energy companies to drill on public property than the Obama administration did in all of 2016. The Secretary of the Interior, Ryan Zinke, boasted to the Conservative Heritage Foundation in late September. Clearly, again, all former administrations also criminal, also plundering the environment, but this one is ramping it up to new levels. Continuing from this report, our goal is an America that is the strongest energy superpower in the world, stronger than any other the world has ever known, he told the group, and added, the road to energy dominance goes through the great state of Alaska. That's the mentality. Exploit everything that's left, pump up the military juggernaut of mass destruction until there's nothing left. Anyone looking from the outside at our species, the behavior of our species as a whole, would have to conclude that we are not interested in our own survival. that we simply have mass segments of the population that would rather stay in denial and not face reality, while the clinically insane segments of our population run rampant all over the globe, destroying what's left. And again, populations that are all too happy to keep consuming what's left until there's nothing left. For our children, for the web of life, nothing left. And here's an interesting statement from Al Gore, who's also part of the power structure and also a criminal. And he has no business saying anything to anyone. But here's what he said. Al Gore, I tried my best, but Trump can't be educated on climate change. Mr. Gore, how come you can't be educated on climate engineering? How can you possibly claim to care about the environment and ignore climate engineering? How can you possibly claim to be about the environment and own stock in the very oil companies you claim to be fighting? Total hypocrisy. So this is part of the divide and conquer tactic of the power structure, using people like Al Gore to polarize the population so that a segment of the population hates him so much they no longer look at reality, that they take the opposite position of anything he says. And it's understandable to feel great disdain for hypocrites like Mr. Gore. But the fact is, everything Mr. Gore said is false in the opposite direction of what people think. It's exponentially worse than anything Gore has said. And when Gore starts to acknowledge climate engineering and dumps his oil stocks and quits flying around in his corporate jets and puts some solar on his house, maybe I'll listen to him. Not until then. Another headline. Iran's heavy water reactor and production plant containing plutonium suitable for a nuclear bomb is hardest hit in area of magnitude 7.3 earthquake. Back to nuclear, back to contamination, back to the insanity of the military-industrial complex, building more nuclear plants while they're having this type of damage done, just like what happened to Fukushima. And with the earthquakes, given the ionosphere heater's ability to heat strata in the planet, and really credible data stating that can cause seismic activity, or should we wonder about these events? And when we have the U.S. and Israel, now a matter of historical fact, generated the Stuxnet virus. That was the likely causal factor that kept the Fukushima emergency equipment from stopping that catastrophe from unfolding. Who are the terrorists here? Who are the real terrorists? And back to Iran, who hasn't invaded anybody for 230 years, while the U.S. has invaded nearly 100 countries, invaded, occupied, toppled, interfered with nearly 100 countries in 100 years. How many Americans know that, understand that, or want to know it, or want to understand it? Because a burden of responsibility comes. Once you know the truth, a burden of responsibility should come. Unfortunately, to many people, it doesn't seem to ever come, no matter what they're told, shown, no matter what sort of dire facts are proven to them. An unfortunate segment of the population seems never to feel any sort of responsibility. It's somebody else's problem. I've spoken about that many times in the past. For those who think that someone, somewhere, is taking care of the problem, so they don't need to worry about it or think about it, you'll soon be in for a very, very rude and unpleasant awakening as the planet implodes around us. And make no mistake, it is. It's amazing to me that our bodies can take the amount of toxic onslaught that they're already being exposed to from every source, from toxic food, toxic water, intentionally with industrial waste, fluoride pumped into it. The massive amount of pollution pouring down through our air column from countless sources, countless anthropogenic sources. We're putting 100 million tons of CO2 in the air every day. The geoengineers have stated their goal of putting 20 million tons of toxic, incredibly small and lethal particulates in the atmosphere every year. That's their goal. That was just aluminum. That was their stated goal for aluminum. 20 million tons a year. If you have never seen this stated, search David Keith, Dane Wigington. I've gone over that before. You can watch a 5-minute video that's very damning for Dr. Keith. In fact, and as I've stated before, I was banned after that particular exchange with Dr. Keith. I was banned from the next month's conference. I've never been back to one since. But it's amazing our body can take what's already happening to us at this point. On that note, when we try to consider our priorities, How long can any of us hold our breath? If we can't breathe clean air, we're not going to be around long. And circumstances unfolding in India right now, and I'm running out of time, I want to finish up with this. When we look at what's being sprayed in our skies, part of the climate engineering operations, and that all of that comes down to the air column where we all get to breathe it. Aluminum, barium, strontium, lead, manganese, other toxic elements. And we are all breathing that. There's no question we have lab tests from all over the globe to prove it. How long can we hold our breath? And how long will we be functioning at a high enough capacity to have any ability to stand up against this insanity if we don't deal with it quickly? Stories from India from last week illustrate how severe things are becoming in certain parts of the world. Here's the headline: Fire trucks to spray Indian capital amid deepening smog emergency. It's not just smog. India produces immense amount of pollution. I understand that, and I understand that's a huge part of the equation. But they are absolutely also geoengineering over the top of all of that, just like they've done all over the rest of the world, even doing it over the top of the fires that just happened in California, still spraying these incendiary materials, highly toxic. It's nonstop, so it's a part of the mix. So here's from this report from India, New Delhi. India plans to use fire trucks. Think how desperate this is. India plans to use fire trucks to spray water over parts of its capital to combat toxic smog and dust that has triggered a pollution emergency with conditions expected to worsen over the weekend. The thick blanket of gray air and pollutants has enveloped Delhi for days. A U.S. Embassy measure of tiny PM 2.5 particles showed a reading of 523 at 9 a.m. on Friday. The upper limit of, quote, good air is 50. So that's over 10 times higher than the benchmark barrier of what you should not be over. So now we have this statement from the report. PM 2.5 is about 30 times finer than a human hair. The particles can be inhaled deep into the lungs, causing heart attack, strokes, cancer, and respiratory disease. The geoengineering particles, nanoparticulates, perhaps 20 to 50 nanometers based on patents, exponentially smaller still. The smaller they are exponentially more harmful, more dangerous, and that's what we have now. So now here's another headline from India. 2 Indians die every minute due to air pollution. Study says that the breathing in Delhi air is the equivalent to smoking 44 cigarettes a day. That's how bad it is there. It's getting that bad elsewhere. We're just not being told about it. Again, I ask, how long can you hold your breath? If you look up and you see what's being sprayed in the sky and you know every bit of it's coming down where you're going to get to breathe it, why wouldn't you care? And when we have appointees like the Trump administration's appointed to the EPA telling us the air is not dirty enough, you should be alarmed at the world we find ourselves in. All of us must be alarmed at this sort of reality. The scenario playing out in India, again, will soon enough be the fate of all of us if we remain on the current course of planetary omnicide. And make no mistake, this is not speculation. We are already, in the last 40 years, down 60%. 60% of Earth's wildlife populations are gone. 80% of the insects are gone. We're losing 200 to 300 species of plant, animal, and insect a day to extinction. We're there. It's not off on the horizon. It's here. 6th great mass extinction now. What can we do to alter this course? Are we all simply helpless? Or is that conclusion simply what those in power want us to believe? And here's the bottom line. We're only as helpless as we choose to be. Each and every one of us has the individual power to make a profound difference for the better if we simply choose to do so. The single greatest leap we could collectively make in the right direction is to fully expose and halt the climate engineering insanity. How? How do we do that? By each of us playing our part, our individual parts, and helping to reach a critical mass of awareness. How? By helping to wake those around you and asking them to do the same. Again, I would ask, how? By sharing credible data from a credible source. The most powerful fact and photo informational materials available are on the home page of geoengineeringwatch.org, including free downloadable links so that activists can have materials printed locally. Those links are free if you want to print locally. We simply ask you help us to sound the alarm, and using credible data is the most effective and efficient way to do it. But all of us All of us are needed in this critical battle to sound the alarm. Make your voice heard now, while it still matters, while it can still make a difference. Stand with us in this battle. Help us to move the baton of the field. Help us to reach a critical mass of awareness, and we will cause a shockwave around the globe. Our troubles will not be over, but we'll have taken a quantum leap in the right direction. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington with GeoEngineeringWatch.org.